Hi everyone, it's really great to be able to join you for the Pause for Thought today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Helen, I'm Doug's wife. I'm going to be sharing a little bit from Ezekiel today and the Valley of the Dry Bones. So that's found in Ezekiel 37 verses 1 to 14. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, "Son of man, can these bones live?" I said, "Sovereign Lord, you alone know." Then he said to me, "Prophesy to these bones, and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord." So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared upon them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, "Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of man, to say it. This is what the Sovereign Lord says. Come, breath from the four winds, and breathe at these slain, that they might live." So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. Most of you will know Ezekiel as one of the four major prophets in the Bible, and he prophesied at a time when Israel and its people were in ruins. They were exiled from their own lands. The Babylonians were powerful, building their empire piece by piece and expanding. And when they reached the Israelites, there was a long siege, about 18 months, where there was severe deprivation, famine, fire, bloodshed, death. After Jerusalem fell, its leaders were captured, the city was plundered, and the population forced into exile. The temple was completely destroyed. And at that time, the temple was considered the home to God, a place where his kavod, or the English translation is his weighty glory, so the place where there was a tangible sense of the presence of God. Owing to this, the Israelites believed that God had abandoned them, and we can see that in Lamentations, in book 5, where the author laments, "Why do you forget us forever, and forsake us for so long a time?" Ultimately, the Israelites believed it was impossible for their nation to recover. And in its just historical context, this is what the prophecy speaks to. The Israelites in a seemingly dead situation, where God shows Ezekiel he will resurrect them, he will restore them to life, and he will return them to the promised land of Israel. With the perspective of history, we can look back and we can see this happened. God was faithful and he kept his promise, and that in itself could be a message for us today. Right now, we're living in a world where everything looks completely different. We've been left with a roadmap of what to expect, but we live in the reality of knowing that the infection rates could change and the plan will change as well. The country is gradually opening back up to this new normal, but we still live in the reality of knowing a virus is still present and taking every effort to act sensibly with the truth to protect both ourselves and others. Our lives suddenly don't feel as predictable or as stable or as safe as they once did. So this message of God's faithfulness and idea of restoration is reassuring in many ways. It's a comfort and something to hope for, that things will one day get back to normal. But I also think this image goes far deeper when we think about what it means for us today. Yes, it's a message of restoration, but it's also a message of life. This week we hit week 9 of lockdown. I'm on my 10th week of home working and not leaving the house much under the normal restrictions that we're all facing. It's been hard. I miss my family and my church family and my friends, and the days feel long, and there's the general stress of adjusting to a life that feels completely different. I know from the prayer page lots of you are in a similar situation. Worries about family, changes around work, and the general toll of missing people and living a restricted life means that we're all up against it right now. So the first bit this image tells us about life is the powerful reminder that we are raised to be an army. The reality of being Christian is recognising the spiritual battle that rages around us. Jesus has victory over the enemy. But as it says in Peter 5, the enemy is like a prowling lion, and he wants to get every bit of land, every person, every gain he can. His tactics right now are to make the most of isolation, to convince people of their loneliness through social distancing, persuade them that they're worthless through stripping away their normal life situations, and to prey on the worries and to exacerbate the fears as much as he can. We know the truth. Of course we do. We know that we are loved beyond measure by God. We know that we are the apple of his eye and worth the death of his son. We know that God does not want us to have a spirit of fear. And so returning to these truths, speaking them over ourselves as we wrestle with the impact of lockdown, praying them over our friends and church families means that we are fighting, and we are fighting for our family and friends. We can bless our family and friends with our words and bless them with our actions to remind them of the truth. And we will not let the enemy gain ground. But we must also acknowledge the battle is tiring. We're through the stage now where the adrenaline and the crisis management carries us through. And what that leaves us with is the slow drain of chronic stress. Humans are complex. We have psychological, physical, social and spiritual needs. And chronic stress can affect all of these. Psychologically, our emotions become affected. We can feel down, we can feel anxious and more irritable. Physically, our sleep can be affected. Our levels of inflammation actually rise, causing us to feel more pain. Socially, we can become distant, pushing people away, or the opposite, we can become dependent, going to people where we should be going to God. And spiritually, all of this means we can start to drift. So this is where the second part of the image stood out for me. The bones don't know they're dead. More often than not, it's a slow fade spiritually, rather than bang, on fire one day and spiritually asleep the next. It's small steps away from God which can become habits, and the enemy uses these to distance us from God without us noticing. These are things like choosing not to spend time with God, perhaps because we're distracted or trying to keep our mind off of our worries. Or perhaps disagreements we've had are preying on our mind and we're struggling to come before God with those still fresh. Or perhaps it's that we don't want to deal with the emotions spending time with God might bring up, because we're only just about coping. Maybe it's the chaos of a new routine that meant we got out of the habit of allowing time to be with God at all. Perhaps in some way we're feeling abandoned by God in this situation, a bit like the Israelites were, and struggling to come to him in that. Or else perhaps we feel so exhausted with everything that's going on, prayer feels impossible. And these things can be hard to notice. It took God showing Ezekiel for the dry bones to know that they were dead, and it was only then that they could come back to life. In the book of Ezekiel it says 33 times, "You shall know I am God." Holy Spirit stirs our soul, and our spirits long for God. We are parched, dry bones without him, and I wonder how many of us have had those moments, those strange stirrings within us that something bigger is at play, something greater is speaking to us. We shall know it is God. And it's those moments where Holy Spirit starts to wake us up and show us how dry, how spiritually dead we have become. For me, recently, this took the form of Doug and I taking a digital dance lesson from YouTube. After we perfected the first few steps, we decided we were ready to try the dip. This is where the lead throws the partner backwards and then pulls them back up again. Doug and I have always said we're terrible dancers, and we're quite happy with that, and this definitely confirmed it. So Doug did me backwards and I forgot which leg went where. Thankfully the sofa was just behind us, and we fell onto it laughing. It was the most I'd laughed in ages, and it filled me with real joy, and this beautiful moment of joy, this fruit of the Spirit, was God stirring within me, making me come to life and showing me how dry, how asleep my spirit had become through the slow fade of lockdown. So I wonder, how alive do you feel right now? Perhaps you're a warrior standing on the edge of an army with his spirit filled within you, raring to go. Perhaps you're like the skeletons covered with tendon and muscle, looking ready but waiting for God's breath to fill you. Or perhaps you're feeling completely dry, feeling like there's no hope of restoration. No matter where we are in his image, God sends his Spirit to fill us again and again. The word used for breath in the passage that we read is ruach. It's the same one used when God breathed life into Adam in Genesis, and it's used interchangeably in the scriptures with the word spirit. And to me that conveys a real sense of being filled from the inside by God, almost like a spiritual kiss of life. So for me that was the moment of being silly, and when I look at the times I felt closest to God, it's often those silly moments. Since this realisation, I've tried to make more times for silliness, as well as returning to some of the habits I'd fallen out of since lockdown. Regular Bible reading and journaling and worshipping and getting out into nature. Taking these actions is me saying, awake my spirit. It's me choosing to call out to God and spend time to ask for Holy Spirit to come and make me alive again. And this will look totally different for each of us, depending on how God's made us, our likes, our dislikes, our values, our personalities. It might be a starting point for those of us who just don't feel able to right now, that possibly things are just feeling a bit too much, is just spending time and remembering the verse in Romans that the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. We don't need to do anything, but God will work for us, and he'll carry us through, and he will bring us back to life. For others of us, this may be a more conscious choice, examining the patterns that we've fallen into, the habits that we've lost, and choosing to do more of the things that make our spirit come alive, to seek out more of the times the Holy Spirit stirs within us and form new patterns that bring us into deeper relationship with God. We don't want to settle as dry bones. We don't want to settle as a lifeless army. We want to be alive, and we want to be filled with his Spirit. So I'll leave you with those two questions for your pause for thought. How alive do you feel? And what are you going to do about it?